Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Homelessness Committee to order. Welcome to our new digs. We'll try this out, see if it works any better than downstairs as far as being able to hear us and see us and all those other important things. But to begin with, let's start with introductions, and if we go around the room and start with you, Mr. What?
John Weddleton. Patrick Wood.
Bill Evans. Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christy Duff. Nancy Burke.
Zach Burgess.
And if we could also go around the room to see who's joining us. Why don't we start along the back wall here?
J.P. Love.
Dave Piper.
Zachariah Hughes.
Debbie Kelly.
Tom McGrath. Paul Acker. Eric Glatt.
Kim Sykes. Carrie Collins. Nora Morse.
Jack Carson.
Susie Pearson.
Fiona Johnson.
Judith Van Der Eyck. Lisa Souter. Lisa Akita. Caitlin Taylor.
Louise Dick Van Westchel.
Dan Gibney.
Kate Toomey.
Ron Oliva.
Rosella Young.
Dave Barrowby.
Greg Newman.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here.
Mr. Evans, I'm on the phone, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Who is that?
Mr. Bob.
Oh, okay. Hi, Amy. Introductions are done. The first thing on our agenda is the coordinated entry, and I'll turn it over to Nancy for that second.
Thank you. We're going to have actually a couple of agenda items today relating to some of the deeper collaborations that are happening in the community, and coordinated entry is one that I think the Assembly has been following as we've talked about the nonprofit agencies coming together, using resources in a collaborative way through our Tuesday meeting, doing more planning together with United Way, the municipality, the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, really trying to bring all of the community resources so that we can have the most effective use of what we have, recognizing there's no new resources coming in the system, and in fact it may get worse as we go. So coordinated entry is the official name that HUD gives this effort, and it's the same thing that Utah did when they addressed their homelessness. A lot of communities using it. So we have come through a period of time with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, NeighborWorks of Alaska, and some key partners bringing on staff and contracts that can support this collaboration. So Christy Duff is here today with us through NeighborWorks. She's our HMIS system administrator. And then we have the Institute for Community Alliances. We have Zach Burgess and Kimberly Seitz, who are here to talk to us about the back end of the coordination, the HMIS system. So I'll let Christy start, and then we'll ask Zach to give us sort of a visual tour of what the system looks like.
Thank you again for having me. So I should clarify that Kim and Zach are the HMIS system administrators through the Institute for Community Alliances. And I am the coordinated entry system manager. I represent the COC, but NeighborWorks is the fiscal agent for the grant that houses that position. We've been making a lot of progress. Last time I spoke to the Assembly, we talked about progress today, a lot of ongoing coordination and meetings that we've had with all of the collaborating agencies to get this online. And I've continued to work with the agencies in the adult continuum for families and for youth, recognizing what we need in terms of in our housing meetings, who has open housing availability, what clients are referred to the list and meet that eligibility criteria. So I have some updates on what we've made progress-wise since coordinated entry went fully functional or live at the end of the year. We've been doing a lot of list cleanup on the adult side. We've noticed a lot from other, just multiple agencies entering data into the system, and Zach and Kim can speak about that a little more. A lot of duplicative entries that we need to reconcile and clean up. Just going through the meetings and talking about clients and that shared effort, we've identified 38 that were already housed through other programs. That included the SRA program, 325 through Rural Cap, the VA, and 6 others that had passed away. So we were able to clean up the list process that way, and that allows for people who remain on the list to move up in the prioritization they're making. The group is currently working on 8 more housing opportunities as of yesterday's meeting. 3 are through the SRA program and 5 through ACNHS. The family program has housed 6 families as of January 5th. 3 more should be housed by the end of the week. Clare House and CSS are doing a lot of good work bringing in referrals and managing a pretty high level of their caseload. And approximately 15 families through Safe Harbor will be assessed and go onto the list as well. And they're working through a pilot program for a rapid housing project. We had a big kickoff meeting on November 30th to talk about strategies and goals, and it was a wider community effort to identify what the next steps were needed to get implementation going by the end of the year. The follow-up to that is tomorrow afternoon, and that will look at what we've done so far, what's working, and what still needs improvement. That's going to also lead into some ongoing training needs that have been identified for the assessment packets and for data entry. And we've made a lot of strides in bringing more providers on board. And again, HMIS, the data system administrators can speak to it a little more, but recently the Gospel Rescue Mission started attending the weekly outreach meetings. They're part of the interagency data sharing agreement, and that'll bring on additional, we'll know more about other clients in the community that aren't being served at some of our downtown or midtown locations. And they haven't been a part of the system yet, and I would like to recognize that as really fostering that relationship with Gospel Rescue Mission, and they're very excited to start participating in the coordinated retreat effort.
Cool. I met with John Reverend John Lamatia from the Gospel Rescue Mission, but Dave D'Amato also met with them earlier that day, so I think it's like a combined effort.
I think the one too.
Yeah. So speaking to that, on the community plan to end homelessness that was released, it's published on the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness's website. So October 2015, one of the data goals was to bring on those agencies that are not currently using HMIS so that we could have a complete picture of homelessness services provided, so that we could better understand the client's needs and how everything's working. And so Gospel Rescue Mission, we're talking with them, getting them on HMIS. We're talking with Choices, which is a agency that helps with mental health individuals who are homeless, who have mental health issues, that is. Beans Cafe is on as of the last month, and then the Downtown Soup Kitchen Hope Center also has people that are working on the system. So as far as that goal goes, that is definitely a positive. The goals in the community plan are going to be reviewed by the data committee at next month's meeting. We discussed that at our meeting yesterday. And I believe in most of these goals, we are doing pretty good as far as the timelines go. I could go into that a little more in detail, but Christy mentioned the list cleanup. Going from a closed data system, so you have Covenant House, Catholic Social Services, Salvation Army, all those people, all those agencies were siloed. They had their own data that they entered. So when we went to an open system, that created a lot of duplicates. So maybe a client had been served at all 3 of those locations, and those are just 3 locations of many that are in Anchorage. You would have 3 separate records that you had to merge. So we've been going through that, and I think all the duplicates are off the list at this point, but I could be wrong. Yeah, most of them. Yeah, so that's what we've addressed thus far. I can show you a walk through the system if you'd like.
We have a question.
Sure.
So when you bring on a new agency like the Rescue Mission, what does that mean? That means they go to all the people staying there and they say, do you want to be part of this? Do you give this agreement form to each of, or they give this agreement form to each of their clients, and then they enter the data in your internet system?
Essentially, yeah. The database is hosted securely through Bowman Systems, and they're also the vendor of the software. And so bringing on the Anchorage Gospel Rescue Mission would mean they've already signed the interagency data sharing agreement, so they could participate in the Tuesday meeting for the individual coordinated entry process. Essentially, bringing them on would allow them to track data about their clients in the director told me that they already use the system to track their data. So this would essentially be moving them from one system to the other, or they could use both, which some agencies do that, which we discourage, because then you either drop the ball on one or the other, you have to prioritize. So yes, they would put their information into the online database, and then that would be shared with the community to update, statistics, which I will show you here in a second, and give us a better picture of what's going on.
Can I add just a bit
Go
to
ahead.
Zach's piece? So for agencies that are federally funded, it's mandated that they enter into the community HMIS. Gospel Rescue Mission is not federally funded, so that's not a requirement for them. For those that are federally funded, they don't have to sign that sharing agreement, but as part of their federal funds, the clients are required to be entered into the database, but they don't necessarily have to have a shared record within the database. And so they can be entered in as just being part of that agency, but if they do sign that data sharing agreement, that's where we can have the open data across the city.
Okay, so half the individual homeless people you approach sign this, or three-quarters, what percentage?
You would have to talk to the different agencies, because if they haven't signed it, we're not going to see it on the database side. So, but we have not had, when we've asked about that, we have not had many people declining to sign it.
So maybe I can just fill in a little. So when we're doing outreach, when people are out in the camps or on the street, asking people to sign this release allows us to bring them in and start coordinating around their particular needs. So the goal is for everyone we encounter to sign this so that we have a comprehensive community list. Whereas before, each agency kept their own wait list, and so you probably, try to get on everybody's wait list, and that's where the duplicate records came in. I think we pulled up one the other day, and there were 9 different records for the same person because they touched different parts of the system. And now, once we have this release and this agreement, we can see all the services that person's accessed from one area.
I think Mr. Flynn, Mr. Trainey, and Ms. Gray Jackson also have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do appreciate the effort to coordinate. I'm curious, and this is probably an easy question, and I know we've talked about it to a degree before, but is there a similar level of effort on preventing homelessness? I mean, getting to people before they find themselves in a situation where they lack housing? My understanding of continuum of care, it's a lot easier to get them before the problem starts, I guess. So what are we doing on that front to coordinate intervention?
I would say for each population area, there's a slightly different answer. I think for families, because HUD has us working in the schools, I think there's more prevention work that's happening upstream, if you will. For adults, there's really not the organized way to contact them. And it's a place we've started thinking about, getting into eviction courts, getting into places where people might hit when they're starting to struggle. Landlords are another key part of that landlord liaison project, is not just when they're at the end of that relationship, but when that person first starts to struggle. The youth, I would say we're better able to be proactive with youth because, again, the school system and the structures that support them. So I would say that it's certainly something I've really noted when you say it, because it's absolutely right. It's much cheaper to keep people from getting in the system. With the adults, I would say we're pretty busy trying to get our minds around who's out there, who's likely to die right now, and trying to push the system upstream is the work that we need to do over the next couple of years.
I'll reserve future thoughts on that.
And Mr. Trainey and Ms. Gray Jackson, and just a reminder to everybody, it's still a very big room, so please speak up.
Will the Gospel Rescue Mission coming online with this, is that going to change their standards, bringing people in for their services? Right now, they have a 0 tolerance for alcohol, which my constituents appreciate.
Yeah.
So are they going to change that at all?
Nope, the way they're doing it, they sign an interagency data sharing agreement, which does not come with strings, except that they're willing to share information about clients and they're willing to be in those meetings and participate. So that's the only strings attached that I'm aware of.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you just tell us all again what HMIS stands for?
Oh yes, it's Homeless Management Information System.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I will add, to clarify, so when we are in the meetings, whether it's the adult, family, or youth meetings, we're talking specifically about housing providers that have openings and clients that meet those opening needs and connecting them with those resources. The larger program needs, like case management, barriers to housing, maybe a lack thereof, is discussed or will be in a larger setting that Nancy's organizing. And that's, it's part of how HUD has designed the program and what's mandated. It's only focused on the housing side, but there's much more to it that's needed to make the program successful overall. And once we get someone housed, what those next steps look like.
So maybe just a little thread along that line as well. The change that's happening is one where, if you remember us talking about all the different slots that are still funded financially through each agency. So the mental health centers can only serve people with mental illness. We have addiction providers, we have other types of disability providers. We still have financing for the services side coming into those channels. And what used to happen is housing would be at the end of that, because it wasn't viewed as the first thing that needed to happen, which is why the Housing First name is so catchy. But getting people to housing and then coordinating those resources, we won't be divorcing those two processes. It's just that we're looking to house people for stabilization and then to ensure that we have those services on site, supporting the person in the community, which is what we know brings about the program results that we've seen of 80% retention of housing over 1 year, 2 year, longer. So we know that we have to continue the coordination. It's just how you manage people who are participating in this system versus the other systems, and there's still quite a bit of community coordination that needs to happen.
That prompted a question from Mr. Dunbar.
Actually, this is actually not related to that point, but who developed this intake form? Is this something the state gave to us or something that we built ourselves? So there's a typo on page 5 that ordinarily wouldn't be worth talking about, except that it sort of hampers the ability of the signatory to understand what they're signing. So on this page here, I understand that blank have the right. I assume you mean, is it providers or I? Who has the right to receive?
Oh, it's missing I. Mm-hmm.
It's I, it's not providers.
Correct.
It's the signatory has the right to receive
Okay.
information.
Okay. I was reading that, couldn't figure out what it was. All right, thanks.
Which will not throw the ROI out. We've restarted 4 different times on this ROI. That's okay. That's good. Just write it in, people.
Good attention to detail, Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's one of those where you've read it so many times too. Okay, so I think maybe, I guess the question for the members, would you like to see maybe what a report looks like, how that back end is in the data system is organized? Zach says he can give us a little tour.
Sure. So here is what the data system looks like. So you load it up and you're presented with the client search. We've got different modules that contain different information. Essentially you have your client point module, which contains all the client information. And this is the training site. We couldn't show you the live site, but they are a mirror image of each other. So when someone's entering a new client, they would search first name, last name. We would see that we have John Doe, who is in our system currently. And this would pull up a variety of other data points. We've got client demographics. We can specify which households John Doe is a part of. The ROI is always filled out and uploaded to to this portion, so we can always see when, how long that client's allowing their information to be shared. Different projects or different programs that are agencies that are part of the system will do entry exits. We can see which case managers they've been a part of, they've worked with, what case plans the clients are working on. You can see which services have been offered to the clients, and we use the assessments portion a lot for the coordinate entry. There's several assessments, one of which is the VI SPIDAT, which is a vulnerability index assessment that assesses the client. And so all of this data is aggregated to be reported to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So none of the client level details are sent to the federal government. The only people that have access to the client level details are the other agencies that are participating in the data sharing. And so all of I'll pull up the report now. All of that data gets aggregated, and here is an example. This is from December. This is information from December. And we can see the total number of adults, persons and households served during, now this is operating year, but we clarified it to just pull only from December. So in December, 1,435 adults had gone through the system. They had an entry into an agency. That doesn't mean that they're homeless. That means that they had participated in that agency. And this would be children that are that were entered into the system as well. The other tab that I wanted to show you, and this is kind of where our successes are shown. In December, this is the destination by household type and how long they stayed. So this first column here is the permanent destinations. This is the clients that were helped that then exited that program to go to permanent housing. And so this box here specifies the leavers who were in the program for more than 90 days. And so we see the subtotal that there was 8 total clients, or I'm sorry, that's households. There was 8 total households that were in the program for 90 days or more that were housed in December. And we scroll down a little further, we can see again permanent destinations, and this is for leavers who stayed 90 days or less. So this is this is someone who's in the program a little shorter term. We had 32 households go from the program into permanent housing. So that is an example of what's pulled from the system itself. We get a lot of questions about wanting more information and maybe wanting specific data details. Right on our website, icalliances.org, you can find our, we go to our location. We serve several different states. Alaska is at the top because we're number 1, I think. So right here, you can request custom data, or you can make custom data requests, and we've had people using that. We're trying to draw people to that more and more. You can sign up for our newsletter, training calendar, etc. This is a tool that we really want the community to be aware of. So we're trying to get that out there. Any questions?
That's great, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is impressive. Is this a piece of software that you had approved, or was it something that was built in Excel, or?
It's made by Bowman Systems.
Oh, okay.
Bowman Systems is the vendor, and so they produced it, and they basically we support the system, and we work specifically with communities to help them use the data to end homelessness. Mm-hmm. When ICA, so Institute for Community Alliances, was given the contract for this, mm-hmm. One of the purposes was to fulfill the goals that were in the community plan to end homelessness. Mm-hmm. So we're working on making that happen, and until October of last year, it was one person that was running this HMIS system for Anchorage and for the entire state of Alaska. And in that time, when she was there, they took the data from 63% to 92%, the quality of the data from 63% to 92%. So we think that now that we have 3 staff members on the ground, we think that we can make.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at software, and so when it interacts with Excel, it looks like?
It can
'Cause
report
that's
to Excel.
When you pick, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, we can report to Excel.
Right.
And so if someone requested data,
Mhm.
we would probably send them an Excel sheet.
Right, that's really great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Flynn and Mr. Train?
Yeah, actually, data quality was my question. And if you don't know the answer, you can get back to me, but to what degree does the software look for commonalities to correct for data entry errors? How does that function?
Yeah, definitely.
Because obviously, we're dealing with a population where miscommunication can be pretty simple.
Right. So since Anchorage has become a data sharing community, there are duplicates, and so what it looks at, and I'll go back to our client profile here. This data from the client record, the name, any alias, social security number, and there's several other measures like date of birth that it looks at. It combines all of those into a unique ID, and so it uses that unique ID, which is different from the client ID, but it basically, on the back end, it looks at all those measures, and if it sees a similarity, we can pull a report to see those similarities. And right now, as part of the system as a whole, every agency, if they notice that there's something that needs to be, like two client records that need to come together, be merged, we have reports out that they fill out the report and they send it in with, however many that they find. And so we're taking quite a chunk of the.
Are you talking about deduplicating or the data quality piece of itself?
Yes.
So right now, what we've been reporting out on is data completeness, not necessarily data quality. And so that's the statistics he's talking about, from 60% to 93% is straight data completeness. Now the quality is a whole number of other factors that we haven't really touched as of yet. Now with both of us being on staff and here in Anchorage, that's something that we're wanting to get to more, is the data quality in terms of how fast it's getting into the system, and those measures about miscommunication and what's accurate and what's not. At this juncture, I think quality in terms of what they're telling us versus what is accurate is comparing what one agency has versus what another agency has on that same client, and then using Monica, I cannot say her last name, but the new transition coordinator for individuals to really follow up with people and hash out the details on how accurate the data is that they gave us originally.
Yeah, I think that's the issue where I'm most concerned.
Can I-
That's very easy.
Can I speak up? Hi, sorry.
Oh, this is Alyssa Parrish. She's our boss.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. My name is Alyssa Parrish. I'm the Alaska project manager. I'm not in Anchorage. I actually work out of Des Moines, Iowa. But we started this process in June of 2015. And for data completeness, we're talking about data elements that are HUD mandated, data elements that have to be entered into this HMIS. And in July 2015, it was an average of 67% complete. And by April of 2016, it was up to 93%. So that's what they're talking about completeness-wise. I have started in the last couple months sending utilization reports to agencies. So looking at, during this month or during this time period, this report is showing that you served this many clients in your shelter or in your project. Is that an accurate reflection of how many clients you actually served? Because that's what we ran across as being the other major issue beyond data completeness, was that either clients weren't being entered or they weren't being exited. So we're either looking at, okay, does this utilization rate, is it really low or is it really high? And if it is, where are these issues? So that's another piece of data quality overall, and not just looking at, is this data element entered into the system or not?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Alyssa, this is Patrick Flynn. My question was more along the lines of how accurately are we getting data into the system, and given this is a vulnerable population that often have ancillary issues, are we recording who they are as accurately as we can? And
Yes.
what I think I'm hearing is we haven't quite got that figured out yet. We try, but I'm not hearing what the metrics are to measure that.
I might have an answer for you, Patrick. I have noticed along the way that we have all of the providers are really making an effort to get the information in there, but it still isn't consistent. And we're identifying this along the way. ICA offers regular HMIS training, so everyone is entering data consistently. We've had large workshop settings, smaller groups, and they offer it on a regular basis to all the providers to participate. There is, so for every service group, youth, family, and single individuals, we have assessment packets. They're tailored slightly differently to each of those populations. We have a follow-up, there have been packet trainings. There's a follow-up one scheduled for cross-training this coming Monday, the 23rd. So everyone can see what the differences are in those packets and make sure that they're assessing everyone and asking the questions appropriately and getting the most accurate answers. So when we go over the list, we know people are being prioritized the way they're supposed to be according to HUD standards for coordinated entry. And that cross-training is going to be taught by the transition coordinators, Monica Stacer, who represents the adults, and Brian Schaefer, who represents the family unit. So as we go through the process and we identify these needs, we're continuing to address them to clean up that data and ensure that we're serving the most vulnerable and the most efficiently.
Training. How much of the funding is for this system? Anything at all?
All of it.
How much money are we
HMIS
talking
is
about?
required by the HUD.
It's gonna go to revision very shortly. So I wanna make sure we're not going with this and then only find out the Fed's gonna pull the dollars from underneath it. How much money are we talking about with the Feds? They came down for this program.
For the contract for the, system. Does anybody know?
Can you-
speak to this?
I would say, I don't know if Alyssa's on the phone and knows, on top of her head, how much the total contract is, but it's a partnership between HUD funding and matching funds from Alaska Housing Finance Corporation to fully support the program right now.
This is Carrie Collins with AFC.
I was concerned
I am,
about
and I can
big
pull it
change
up, but
not
it's
happening, you
gonna-
say the money's gonna be flowing down differently from all.
Take a listen.
I think she was looking for the contract.
Oh.
Yeah, I have the budget. It's, and so with the balance of state and Anchorage together, the total budget is $287,400. And we've had concerns about HUD too, and the coming administration and what's going to happen. But any administration wants data. I mean, I think that's a given. Now, how much money they put towards data is the question. But the CRC NOFA was already, that's already been awarded for 2018, the goals through 2018. So I think it's safe to say that we're safe for the next, couple of years. Beyond that, I don't think anybody can know.
Thank you for the question.
So I'm wondering if part of the question that Mr. Flynn was asking was also related to how the data, collecting the data from the person, the data is only as good as it is. And there was a question in one of the last sessions asking about the vulnerability index and what's on it. And I have a copy of it pulled up here on the screen. We can just kind of go through some of the information that's asked, but this is the actual survey that's asked of people on the street. It goes through the big risk areas that we've talked about of, really it's about who's likely to die on the street. So medical issues, mental health issues, and substance use issues. So it begins to look at how often does the person go through the emergency department, taking ambulances, being hospitalized. So it looks at health risks. I'll be happy to send the entire assessment around to the members. It looks at social and daily functioning because we know that the more connected a person is in their social relationships and support, the less likely they are to be experiencing more addictions and more mental illness symptoms or medical problems. They'll be more likely to get care at the primary care level instead of through emergency departments. It asks about wellness, which also includes medical issues. So there's an entire screening. I think the whole screening is 3 pages is for this one, and then we have some additional community questions that we ask that help us know if the person qualifies for certain types of funding programs. So from this whole document, there will be a score that's somewhere between 0 and 17. And when I asked our data folks if they would run the distribution of how people are scoring on this assessment for everyone who's in, and I think this one had a number of 247 people that were in the database at the time, and this is the distribution for where they are on the vulnerability index. And so this is the same, pretty similar to the way people distributed last January when we had a little over 100 people. It was this bell curve with the biggest bubble of people in the middle of the assessment, and then the two ends with fewer. This is what helped us start thinking about high, medium, and low interventions, where the really heavy service-laden housing first programs need to be positioned, and really that we think we're on track to, we've filled a lot of that need. You know, we don't see a big bubble at the end of this chart, so we're getting people to the right level of service. Now we need to move into the next area, which is more about certain access to treatment, access to primary care, access to more ready access to mental health services, and we can start diving into that middle group of people. So it's tricky because our assessments are self-report. We'll begin to be able to use other data to back up the self-report that we see, but everything that we're doing is around this survey. That's the vulnerability index. And then, as Christy said, this is really about housing. How vulnerable are you on the street, and how can we get you to housing with the right level of services, and then connecting all of the resources for you to stay in housing so that you don't have another episode of homelessness.
So the population for this is people who are homeless now?
Yes.
Can I clarify that? This is people that are homeless now that have been referred to the priority list for housing.
Correct.
It's not, because when we did that point in time thing, people were asking these questions. Would
Yes.
that data be in here?
Yes. Well, because we had a couple of starts on it, I would say that many of the people that were in our first group are already in here or have moved to housing. Part of those folks that got into programs, because we were getting paperwork and the right release ready, we had to actually redo people twice. But now we have all of the paperwork down, and we're everyone that we encounter from this day forward who gets this release and packet will be referred onto the list. So here is another, I'll just put this over on yours. Zach has the age distribution, which is another interesting, just helping us figure out how to fine tune our programming. We can now look at age distribution, VI SPDAT distribution. These are tools that we just haven't had at our fingertips in the past. So this big group in the 50s is consistent across. On Thursday, just a teaser for everyone, we'll be reviewing the university did an evaluation of Carlick Manor and the Tanana Chiefs project in Fairbanks, and this bubble of folks in 50 is the highest age category in that evaluation study as well, which is interesting to us because we're we really are looking at an older population of people who've probably been on the street a little bit longer, but it tends to drop off at 60 to 69, and either that's because we're getting those folks into senior housing or they're not making it. We do know that the life expectancy for people after they've been on the street for a while is shorter. So placing some more interventions in this 50 to 59 age group and 40, and then moving back as Assemblymember Flynn pointed out, getting back to as early as we can is the direction we need to go.
Questions?
So, okay. I think the next piece that we wanted to review, thank you to the HMIS administrators and our coordinated entry folks. These folks are really doing amazing work getting all of this organized. It seems simple, like we should just be able to all sit down and work together, but it is very complicated. We're still learning a lot each week we meet. So as we went through this community coordination, and if you remember, we took a look at the places where there were strategies and activities in the community. There was recognition that one place where we didn't have as much activity or identified goals was around public safety and the interface of where our homeless folks and public safety in neighborhoods, that interface, which brought us to collaboration with the CAP team. Lieutenant Carson is here, and Melina Breland is here from Anchorage Community Mental Health. We struck on the idea of the social services coordinator really having some more resources in that APD part of our community outreach so that we could better respond to people who have needs out in the community. So I just wanted to give a little bit of time to them to talk about, we had it on the agenda for last meeting and we really ran out of time to talk about the social services coordinator position which will be housed in the CAP team. And maybe we could start with Melina and we could just get an update on where we are with the actual person.
We've identified someone. Currently, Lieutenant Carson and I are working together to identify what exactly would work best, and then I can figure out training around that. So currently, I'm shadowing the CAP team and kind of inserting myself in it right now to identify those needs clinically that we need to be trained on. That's really where we are with that part.
Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Who are you with?
I'm Melina Breland. I'm with Anchorage Community Mental Health Services. And I think he's going to talk more about.
So I'm Lieutenant Carson with the Anchorage Police. I'm the commander over the CAP team. We're super excited about coming together with Anchorage Community Mental Health because in the past what's happened is there's been a big chunk of our job is dealing with people that are struggling with the addictive processes and also with mental health. And there's kind of been a disconnect in the past where we go out, we see them in true crisis, we write a report, we either forward on case numbers to their caseworkers or give them a call, leave a message, and then we don't have any more contact after that. We don't know what happens after that. And there's not that personal communication going back and forth between our organizations to make sure that people aren't missed and fall through the cracks. It's more we're just doing our duty where we just forward on the information. We've done what we say we think we need to do, and then it kind of Lord knows what happens with it. So this is super exciting for us because now what we're doing is we're getting someone with us who is going to work side by side with us. So it gives them the chance to truly see someone that is in crisis during the crisis and know what we're dealing with versus going out there several weeks later in an outreach setting and then they're not truly in that crisis that we're responding to that day. So the availability of them to be able to go out with us and see these individuals and get them the help that they need is I think going to reduce our calls significantly. Here in the last week, we just sent out our AMC 880 bills. There was 18 addresses that were billed and upwards of $90,000, a little over $90,000. And we believe with this program and getting them involved in the 880 plus on the homeless camp side, we can truly reduce a lot of these calls that the Anchorage Police Department is going to and allow us a lot more on to focus on different things and trying to prevent crime before it happens versus responding to crime after it happens. If we can truly get these problem addresses under control and a lot of the homeless camp issues that we have under control, which goes along with what Mr. Flynn was saying, that trying to get ahead of the system, trying to stop them from becoming homeless. If, one of the major solutions to the 880 and these addresses addresses and the landlord's getting billed is we send them notice after about eight qualifying calls. So on the 9th call, we send them out notice, and the common solution is eviction. So it doesn't take many evictions before homeowners aren't willing, or renters are no longer willing to service that person. So then they're almost getting pushed into the homeless community. So by getting the outreach program out there, hopefully we can prevent a lot of that by getting them with the resources they need, getting some of their addictive processes under control, or at least manageable, or get them the mental health that they need so that their highs and lows are a little less. So it's that on the 880 I think is going to be super helpful. Hopefully we can reduce that number. We'll hopefully find out by next year, but we can redo that. And when we say 18 addresses that we sent out $90,000 to, there's significantly, you almost times that by 4 or 5 of addresses that we're responding to 8 or more times. But according to the ordinance, it has to be qualifying calls. So I commonly see when I start reviewing these cases, out of a case for an address that we may bill for 15 police calls in a year, there's really upwards of like 30 calls to that address, but there's only about 15 to 18 that actually qualify because the domestic violence or other disqualifying calls that will eliminate that residence from doing it. So on face value, we could be reducing calls residences that receive around 18 calls, but in reality, we're responding to these addresses 30, 40 times in a year. If we can get that number down under 8 significantly for their time, and be better for the city as a whole.
Mr. Prejackson, I have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is really great. Is this gonna be funded through the mental health authority or through the APD operating budget?
It is not funded by APD at all. They are not an Anchorage Police Department employee. It's funded through grant money through the municipality of Anchorage, directly with them.
So it's through a grant? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wilton?
Can you look at the data from this management information that we just talked about?
I can.
So if you're there, you can type it in so we know this.
Yes, I am currently working with, there's certain grant reporting requirements that are going to be required, and I need to figure out what those are. And I'm hoping to tie it all together so that we don't have to ask these individuals a ton of information, but to find a way to track what we're doing, and we will be able to access the HMIS system to see what folks are, and try to either reconnect them with who they're connected with, or finding appropriate services to connect them.
I guess I have a follow-up question to that. I mean, given the fact that the confluence of law enforcement and mental health has been a big issue recently with a shooting in Florida, and I think this is a great idea. Do we have confidence in that there are services available when this person goes out, identifies somebody in need of such services, that we can plug them in to try to intervene? It seems, from my general knowledge, that may be a bit of a stumbling block. Do you perceive that as such?
I think yes, I think part of it is going to be that folks are just not getting connected, and there are services, and I think the other half is going to be that we're going to find a lot of gaps, but we're going to have research on where those gaps are now, which I think will help. I just was at a meeting with South Central about the homeless population and them not being able to navigate that system last week, and so we already started conversations about, like, that's a gap in services and how can we fix it, and I have data for that. I don't have data for this, so as soon as I do, I think we can really start having those conversations as well.
So we will be able to get at some point reports from this position on situations in which a need was identified, but no availability was there to take care of it.
That's my hope.
Thank you.
I think given the week that we're in right now with our legislative friends beginning, it's probably not a bad idea for us to mention that mental health grants have had reductions. They've had no increases for almost 10 years. And, asking that system to do more with less. Now, I think what we're trying to do is position knowledgeable people within the place where people are hitting within APD so that we can do better with what we already have and engage, all of the partners in that work. But I still, it's a thin system. It's a very thin system, and we're leveraging it well. I think this will make it much more responsive, but it still is thin.
That's the idea in SB 91 is you take money that was going to lock them up and you put it into this mental health, some amount, and that money's not going to treatment.
I think I actually wanted to make a note that the committee did ask, last time that we have a review of alcohol treatment services, and I'm queuing that up for our February agenda. I'd like to invite some of the state partners. I'm not exactly following where that money went, but generally, this is what happened in the 70s when we deinstitutionalized mental health. We said locking people up isn't the right thing, but you have to build out those community resources, and that never really was fully built out, which is why we have people who were then going to incarceration, and so it's the same story. It's one that really deserves a lot of attention.
Other questions? Is there more than that, or was that it?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, Melina comes to us from another community where what we're doing with this project is we're placing someone who's a social services coordinator, who's going to be like a system expert. But other communities, to get to your question about when people come to our attention who need additional coordination and connection, the idea of maybe looking at another phase of this in the future where we may have a clinical person paired with the crisis team to diffuse some of those circumstances or to get a better evaluation of a person in the moment became more desirable to me over the course of the last 2 weeks. And I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to say about how that works in Seattle, or if you think that's worth pursuing this community as well.
I do. I think it's very much needed. In Seattle, if someone was experiencing an obviously mental health related crisis, we would send out a clinician with an officer. They were partners, and so they worked very closely together, and they would intervene in a mental health capacity. And the officer took the lead actually most of the time, having learned a lot of mental health tactics and learning kind of like the causes behind why someone was interacting that way. And it diffused a lot of situations. They also were able to more quickly assess if someone needed to go to the hospital versus jail, depending on like motivation behind if they truly understood what they were doing. And it built a better connection with the population that we're trying to like reach with this, with the police department as well. They weren't as afraid when the officer came by to talk to them, and we were like as case managers, we were also involved in that process. It was really like wraparound services between the police department, mental health service providers, and officers. Like the officer and the clinician would also go to homes and help like work on prevention as well. So if someone was stealing from their neighbors a lot, they would go talk to them about how like we're going to have to arrest you if you continue this, and it would decrease behavior more than just a clinician saying like you need to stop doing this. Because it was an officer saying if I come back and talk to you, I'm going to have to arrest you. So there was a lot of things that we needed to do in that position, and I do see a lot of here as well.
And one more thing, is that this position is going to be housed out of CAP. It's actually available to the whole Anchorage Police Department. So any of the officers that are routinely going to addresses or seeing someone in mental distress that's causing a higher workload within the shifts, they'll have that direct contact with that outreach worker to be able to respond out there. We'll go out with the team if we need the security and try and reduce the calls that way too. So it's not just available for 880 and homeless, it's available to the whole Anchorage Police Department for anything that would be qualifying within the addictive process for mental illness. I think we can keep the position very busy. Sure.
Agreed.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. Community plan progress, midway.
So we have Dave D'Amato from the United Way with us to talk with us a little bit about as Christy mentioned, there's the HMIS system and the coordination around moving people to homes, and then there's the broader, what I call well-being, staying in housing coordination that's happening. The Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness is the base of our backbone, but there's a three-partner group that's now working together. We've signed an MOA to do all of our planning, all of our work together. We're meeting regularly, and so Dave's been doing some work across the three organizations, and I asked if he would give our update today.
So the work plan is coming along pretty well. What we find is with any project of this type is that these work plans are written a little bit more with a singular goal in mind, with ceaseless adjustments underway. What you've heard so far today is people talking about an HMIS system, about running into obstacles with HUD and other agencies like this that have very strict reporting requirements. And the purpose of other jurisdictions that have done plans like this is to take a look at their community objectives and their community capabilities and work around those obstacles. The work plan that we've got right now kind of identifies a series of obstacles that I would define as being practical, financial, and regulatory. And a lot of what you're hearing today about collection of data and HMIS is about some of the regulatory problems that we're running into. The graph that you've got in front of you, you've heard mostly today about community infrastructure and development, coordinated entry, and HMIS continuum of care. But this is a little deceptive, this graph, because we don't necessarily start and read from left to right. We kind of start in the middle, understanding that we had an opportunity and that we were building out HMIS and coordinated entry, but we're working in all directions simultaneously. And the plan is working in all directions and making amendments to the plan that this body and the Coalition to End Homelessness worked on throughout last year and came up with the Anchorage plan. So that plan is still, we have to define it this way. The goal is always going to be to end homelessness, but we must constantly be reacting. And so this week, what we've reacted to, you heard Zach earlier speak to the fact that we found out that there was a person who wasn't entering into the HMIS system. And so the reaction was they weren't mandated to enter into HMIS, but from the Anchorage plan's perspective, we had to get them in there because we need to understand a complete and comprehensive picture of what our homeless situation looks like if we're going to be solving it. And so we reached out at United Way, Zach reached out, the connection was made, and that data will now come in. Assemblyman Finn asked about data, and I think an important development that's happening in the plan now is that we are setting up provisional work plans about who's going to be working specifically on these things as we encounter specific obstacles. And one of the main drivers of our work plan is to identify data points that are outside HMIS or other mandated data points that are actually important to the community itself. What does the community of Anchorage need desperately? And so that bottom brown square, for example, says housing units. And so the Muni and United Way have been doing a lot of work on trying to identify housing units, and you'll be seeing some of that either in the next assembly meeting or very shortly when we talk specifically about housing units that we're bringing up to speed in an effort to bring more housing units online and to make them more readily rentable and able for this population to utilize. The bucket that we're still sort of really sorting through is that community engagement and communication. And this gets back to the fact that the backbone organizations, the Muni, the Coalition and Homeless and United Way, we're still working through exactly what obstacles we're encountering and how we want to message and how we want to engage in the community to address the problems that we're seeing. And so that piece is being built out as we're building out that work plan, because we're building out this work plan at the time that we're also working on the cold weather shelter. And that is obviously something that is on everybody's mind and something that has to be taken care of, especially over these next 3 or 4 days. I spoke to you last time about the landlord liaison, and I can tell you that that's another one of those positions that it's defined both by our community goals and the community partners, because each of our community partners have opportunities to house people, but with the landlord liaison position that we want to bring online, there are immediate obstacles. We need to have that landlord liaison to be able to do things that you'd expect them to do, like negotiate or help understand the leases that are appropriate for the appropriate population, but also operate vouchers and funding sources if that's appropriate for them. And so we're in communication with other people who have regulatory boundaries, like the Housing Finance Corporation, to see whether or not how that position can be built out best to accommodate the conditions that we're seeing here on the ground when it comes to financing and vouchers and that sort of thing. So next time when we meet, I hope to have a more comprehensive work plan. We'll take this thing that you've been seeing for quite a while, and you'll see a more comprehensive, this is the direction we're going, and this is how we plan on ending homelessness in Anchorage for you.
Any questions? I don't see any questions. Thank you very much. All right. Is there anything further you have?
I think that's right.
Mark, we usually go right up to the last minute. This brings us to the point on the agenda where we have member comments, and I failed to mention that we were joined by Assemblyman Croft quite a while ago, and he's still here. We have that table. But are there any member comments to the audience? Halfway to the homeless, that's for sure. Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think we're headed in the right direction, it seems like, communicating between departments seems to be improving. And so we can just get to the point where people aren't falling through cracks. We keep track of who we know who's out there, who needs help, or a better chance of getting them in a better position. So I think we're making progress. It just seems like it takes longer than you would hope. Thank you.
Good comment. Seeing no other members with comments, we have some time for audience participation. If you have any questions, comments, or statements of a minute or two, glad to hear it. Mr. Oliva, what have you got to say first?
Well, you adjourned without public participation at the last meeting, and we were discussing the $75,000 no bid, unsolicited contract, which was called by the ombudsman, didn't pass the red face test. I don't think it passed the charter test when you will allocate that kind of money and don't put it up for bid. Because I donated a van to CHAR. They did a good job taking community service workers, et cetera, people off the corner to pick things up. But this gentleman who was given that contract, he told me he didn't even solicit it. And then he brought it over to the Porcupine property, screaming deal at 5 cents a square foot, put his wife in there ahead of a social service agency, and delivered her customers. I didn't care for the transparency here or the process of solicitation. If we're gonna help the homeless, I want 100% transparency. And I want it published that, hey, if that's out there, I have another van ready to donate to help the homeless. And in the case of the person getting killed at the Econo Inn, that was my worker. And I could have kept him working if possibly we had a grant right next to the shelter. And I know that I could have put that money to better use, or known people who could have put that money to better use and continued it, rather than a photo op or some sort of political ploy over the summer. So I'm concerned about that not happen again. And I think GuideStar should publish, and we should get copies of all the nonprofits, including Providence Hospital, whose CEO makes over $1 million a year, came and handed out all this money. But if you read Charles Wolford's article on the excessive charges that hospital is charging, it was outrageous. It was almost like theft. And those aren't the healing hands of Jesus. Those are nonprofits making money on sick people and passing it out to these agencies, if they have that surplus, I want them to pay some real estate taxes for police and fire protection and the homeless. Now, I could go on and on.
Please don't.
I won't, but I want to see some action because I'm in mourning for my worker. Now, that's the second one, because you haven't solved Robert Workman's death, who got shot above my property. And the one for Covenant House that we haven't solved is Shauna Yvonne. You remember her age? It was 12. And she laid next to the monkey ward for 6 weeks, an unsolved murder. So what's in my heart is gonna come to the surface, but I want accountability, and don't exploit it.
Mr. Oliva, any other comments, questions, updates? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, comment. I think that maybe the people who might have the answer to this might have left the room, but just in terms of the AP social worker, I guess I think that I come from a mental health background, and so the co-response that we've learned about with crisis intervention team officers that we do have trained ideally would include a social worker or clinician, just like the ACMHS staff was sharing, but that has been lacking. So I think that according to the lieutenant, that the social worker would be available to other officers. I think that in other communities, it really has been, there's been a model that has been already developed and rolled out. I'm not sure if what we're doing here is new with the campaign, but if it is, I think we really probably should be looking at what they've done in other communities. One concern, and that I just wanted to bring up is if they have the ACMHS social worker as a co-response, however this rolls out, is it just going to be limited to ACMHS clients, or is it going to be limited to, or is it going to be open to non-ACMHS clients? So I just wanted to comment that, and I know that those folks left the room, but those would, there's definitely a model that's been out there that's based on crisis intervention training that we do all across the nation. We just haven't, we do the training here in Alaska and in Anchorage with our APD officers. We do not have the co-response built in right now, even though we have a number of officers that are trained.
Thank you. Do you have any?
Respond a little bit to that?
Yeah, why don't you?
One of the challenges that we're addressing with the mental health services is the fee structure that comes down. If you think about that blue column, the financing, the clinical positions, and Dave Barabee is still here with ACMHS, so just raise your hand if I'm off track here. But one of the challenges is on a fee-for-service model where every minute of that clinician's time has to be billed toward a treatment plan. This area of doing outreach and engagement has to be grant funded. And I think you've seen this in your work for sure. But it's just good to note that all of our mental health system has been really refinanced through Medicaid, which brings us a 50% federal match, which is great. However, it ties us to only certain activities that happen in that whole process. And where we miss is this upfront process. So this is a grant-funded position, and there's zero productivity associated with the person. So that ensures to us that this person is available, can be responsive, is not tied to certain activities that Medicaid requires, and is available for the whole community. They're actually sort of a part of I think of them as a part of the coordinated entry system, because they will be attending the Tuesday meeting, choices. There's other providers that are available for those referrals. And I totally agree that co-response has not happened, but I think because of the way the finances flow through the community, as we fix that going forward, or if Congress goes to a block grant, or some of the waivers that the state's been working on, we can be more flexible with the resources. But we are still a really very basic fee-for-service state, and that limits a lot. Where it hits us hard is in the outreach phase.
Any other comments, Lisa?
I just wanted, this week is the Alaska Health Summit, which is the statewide health conference that happens every year. And tomorrow, Mr. Evans is going to be introducing a talk that Nancy and I and a researcher from UAA, Dave Driscoll, are going to be presenting on health and housing and homelessness and housing first. And so first of all, I just want to just thank you. I really appreciate you being there. That means a lot. And just to invite, if other members of the assembly would like to come and attend that talk, it's at 8:30 in the morning at Captain Cook. And that would be, it's early, I know, but you're welcome to if you would like to. And I'll make sure that they know that that you just go to the desk and say I'm with the assembly. Okay. And then tonight at 5, there's going to be a meeting at the Captain Cook Hotel that's sort of piggybacking on this conference. It's going to be a follow-up of last year's Governor's Housing Summit. So it's going to be run by Elizabeth Schultz from the Governor's office, but that's open to the public as well.
Thank you. We were going to make that plug. Thank you for doing so. Any other comments, questions? Nancy?
Allison, our Cabinet House partners are not here, but I'm assuming everyone saw the news that we were awarded a youth homelessness grant, which is a tremendous, another vote of confidence for Anchorage's work. And Cabinet House and the Coalition to End Homelessness. Susie's here with the board. Who else is on the board of the coalition?
Dave Piper.
So just congratulations. Lisa Aquino is on the board. Congratulations for that award and for the work that went into that application. It's amazing. And that has potential to wrap into our ongoing funding for youth homelessness, providing our world stays the same.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Just one comment. Last week, the weather forecast for this week showed the downward temperature trend that really raised an alert among the emergency shelter providers in the city. And I know all of you are deeply concerned about the welfare of every person in our community. But I attended a gathering last week of the emergency shelter providers, at which they worked really hard at finding solutions and spaces for what they anticipate to be increased turnout at the shelters. And so I just want to, I guess, reiterate, the folks who are concerned about our homeless individuals, particularly those most vulnerable on the streets, are working really hard. And if you get a chance, tell them thank you, because there's more work that goes on all the time behind the scenes than we could ever imagine, just kind of on the face of it. So I would just think we have a great city, a great group of people working on this, and get a chance to say thank you.
Ms. Krajak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, on behalf of the Anchorage Assembly, I want to say thank you to all the providers. You're doing a wonderful job, and we really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last chance. Any questions, comments? I just want to get pizza, is that it? If you're not on the list already, just contact Amanda over here. She can get you on our list for future meetings. There is pizza behind us, so help yourself to some before you leave. And also, if you have a thought or preference as to whether this room is better than the other room, let Amanda know, and we'll try to make the right fit. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.